big decline in gold and silver futures over the past few weeks was, I think, a realization by the traders that there was, I guess you could say, a sense of people being gullible enough to believe that the Trump administration would halt the upward trajectory of spending, that inflation would be reined in, that the markets would go up eternally because of the Trump trade. And he may be good. And let's just call it what it is. I'm very happy that Trump was elected, and I hope we get a good portion of our culture back. If you've listened to me long enough, you know that I rant and rave about the borders and the election and the judicial system and the institutions that made this country special. The way you grew up, the way I grew up, with respect. And like I always say, my parents were hippies. I mean, I was the jock, but my parents were hippies. I respected everyone, no matter what their lifestyle was. They didn't have to be celebrated, where merit was far more important than lifestyle, where equality is stupidity, where equal opportunity is what this country was founded on. This is what make people strive for greatness. I come from nothing. My family comes from nothing. I say it all the time. My dad's middle name was Miles, and his best friend, who lent us 60 grand to start a company in a one-room office the size of a closet in 1989, before the internet existed, his middle name was Franklin. We took a risk, and it's amazing that we're here 35 years later. And I worked my rear end off. I am the epitome of equal opportunity, not of equality. And I think that there was this sense that, and rightfully so, people, after living in bizarro world for the last 4 years, were just happy to have some hope of restoring the American ideals, which have been whitewashed. No matter what side you fall on, I think people were optimistic. And so the decline in the futures is, I think the traders started the paper price down, and it started hitting stop after stop after stop as the hedge funds covered, or sold rather. It allowed the commercials to cover. They covered almost 16,000 gold contracts at 100 ounces apiece. Do the math, it's a lot. They covered almost 6,000 silver contracts at 5,000 ounces apiece. It's a lot. So the traders took advantage. They've been getting destroyed over the last several months with the rise in gold and silver. There's still almost 200,000 contracts short on COMEX in gold, and about 33,000 short in silver. So they still have large short positions, and every dollar up in gold and silver, they were getting hammered. They used this as an opportunity to kind of level off their balance sheet. But here again, much like we've seen for the last several years, these corrections are very shallow, and they come right back up. And that's because the rest of the world knows we're in a pinch, and they use these opportunities where the paper price is smashed down to buy and to take possession and take delivery of. And I think it speaks to the real demand for gold and silver. And we're not even talking physical in retail. We're talking on a much broader basis. The biggest money in the world understands that, I think, that this is a transition period away from things like US Treasuries, which again are getting eviscerated as the 10-year goes higher, which has been weaponized, which has risen by 500 basis points in a year, which is succumbing to inflation. And because of the weaponization and because of this inflation, and ultimately, I guess it's a long shot, but you could even say default risk. And what we did with Russian treasuries is default. I mean, call it what you want, call it sanctioning, it's stealing. We defaulted, and we used it to fund the Ukrainian war. And these are things, they're doing the same thing in the European Union. These are very provocative moves. And so the rest of the world is saying, I don't want to hold treasuries anymore, and I'll buy commodities with it. But they're very shrewd in the way that they do it. They don't buy it the way most people think they should, just buy it all. Well, then the whole thing blows apart. Instead, they're doing it far more methodical, far more diabolical. They're playing the long game, and every time we're stupid enough to knock it down, they're there with dollars that are losing value, and treasuries which are rolling off their balance sheet and using the proceeds to buy things like gold and silver, and boom, it comes right back up again. So it's not going to be straight line, but what we see with Trump is something we should be excited about. We should be happy that they're going to address all of the things that they are addressing, but it doesn't change the fact that one way or the other, whether it's orderly, where Trump were to do all of these things, bring back manufacturing, in order to do that, in order to do the things that he's talking about, we don't have a manufacturing base. We don't have the facilities or the machinery. You'd have to build all that. That takes time. You'd have to train people. All of the things that he wants to do to become more of a protectionist country, if you will, America first. Well, that could send us into a Great Depression. Or maybe it's far worse than that. He presides over some form of a reset. Any way you look at it, to get to the other side, and I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic for the future of the country, more so than I have been for the last 4 years. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to go through some event, whether it be orderly, which probably not, or somewhat chaotic, whether it be a depression or a hyperinflation or a combination of the both, where it's hyperstagflation, where the Great Depression 2.0 meets the printing press. One way or the other, you have to pay your bar tab. And I think that's coming, and I think the world understands that, and they'll choose inflation over the very, very difficult decisions unless they're willing to slash military, slash Social Security, slash Medicare, slash pensions, slash military or veteran benefits. They're not going to do that. And if that be the case, then it will only increase the amount of debt that is accumulating day by day by day to the tune of $3 billion a day increase. And even slashing all of the waste, the interest just on the accumulated debt is moving at such a pace that it will overwhelm by 2031 everything. It will be the largest line item across the board, only allowing them to make Medicare and Social Security payments, and everything else, all discretional items will have to be borrowed. And of course, that probably means higher taxes as well. So there will be pain to deal with. What that looks like, I don't know. And we'll get through to the other side. But what it also means is that we can expect, I think, a good deal of inflation, which should do very well for all commodities, and will probably do well for stocks and cryptos too. Probably will. But in terms of measuring it in ounces of gold, my belief is that all of these things will fall in terms of its relation to an ounce of gold. And the rest of the world is done taking our treasuries. The appetite for our treasuries is completely and totally gone. And maybe you bring in a Judy Shelton to one of the Fed governor positions who has enough pull to actually introduce legislation to do the 30-year treasury redeemable in gold, as she speaks of, to give some form of incentive to hold our debt, where you have to be out of your mind to buy a 10-year treasury. Right now, to me, it's uninvestable. Inflation being so much higher and there's so much risk in holding it, at some point these kinds of things will need to be addressed. And when you have the level of indebtedness we have, the needing at least 10 trillion a year to finance debt that's rolling over and new debt, who's going to buy all of those treasuries? Does it mean that ultimately it's the Federal Reserve, which is monetization, which creates hyperinflation? I mean, any way you cut it, we have to go through that period of darkness, of pain, of paying our bar tab. And I think there's no one better to administer that than Trump. But to think that the reasoning for holding commodities just vanished is a big mistake. And that's what the traders used to clean up a bunch of their short positions that were really butchering their balance sheet. Been relatively quiet since their big meeting in Kazan, where I talked about how the BIS, in essence, enacted espionage against the BRICS countries. It's right out of a James Bond movie, as far as I'm concerned, threatening to pull the plug on Enbridge at the 12th hour, saying that they couldn't be part of anything that the BRICS are trying to do with Enbridge, because they wouldn't be part of a country that is, or be part of a program where countries involved are being sanctioned by the West. It's as if they forgot that Russia was the R in BRICS. And after 3-4 years of developing Enbridge with UAE, China, Hong Kong, and Thailand, that all of a sudden at the 12th hour when it's operational, they come and say, no, we can't do this. Russia's being sanctioned. Really? Well, where the hell have you been for the last 4 years? That was a big deal. Another big deal to me was a comment that came out of Japan, and so you had one of their principal foreign advisors who said that he said that America first mantra that Trump will bring out will mean that he'll have little interest in the U.S. Japan or even the U.S. South Korea relationship. Now, I can't say that that's true, but this is what he said. And he said as a result, Japan will have to conduct its own foreign policy. And I found it interesting where he talked about a skillful way to manage the power balance with China, Russia, and North Korea. And he said this should be a golden opportunity for Japan. We can take back the initiative and become a truly independent country. He's the one who said, and by the way, he expressed frustration that 85% of their skies are in effect America's skies, where the U.S. military bases account for a substantial acreage in their land, and that since World War II, they've controlled the majority of all the airspace over Japan. He says it's ridiculous. It's interesting when you hear Japan mention BRICS countries. Jim Willey has talked about the fact that maybe Japan would join the BRICS when it's every country for themselves at a certain point.